It's a jungle out there. I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get these.
When Moffat was asked about the Weeping Angels and Flux and whether he hoped that Chris Chibnall would stay faithful to what he'd set up with them, Moffat answered with this: "Every time you bring back a Doctor Who monster, you should be slightly irreverent with it. You shouldn't stick to all the rules. You should break a few. That's the way it works, otherwise you're just erecting a monument to the past, and that doesn't work. Within Doctor Who, it's a dynamic balance between being respectful and being iconoclastic, really. Saying, yeah, but what if we did it this way? Or just doing something cheeky with it. If you don't do that, it doesn't really feel like Doctor Who. It's respectful and grave and important, which are tedious qualities that should never get involved in Doctor Who." With that in mind, let's get on to this.
Right, say your name.
Why?
Just say it.
Clara.
Dalek.
Clara Oswald.
Dalek.
I love you.
Exterminate.
Don't get emotional. Emotion fires the gun. Cybermen suppress emotion. Daleks channel it through a gun. That's why they keep yelling. Exterminate is how they reload.
Now, I knew when I made a video on The Witch is Familiar, I would have to talk about this. This is probably the most controversial criticism leveled at it. So, unlike when I addressed the other criticisms, I'm not going to play clips of other reviews here. With this issue, I'm very concerned I might even accidentally take someone out of context. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ask you to stop watching for now and just quickly watch those videos, or even rewatch them if you've already seen them. There were links down in the description. Leave them a like, friendly comment, they deserve it. So, the issue, as I understand it, is that given the Daleks are a Nazi allegory, by making it out that the casings are an influential factor to whatever degree, removes their agency somewhat and therefore might absolve them of some of the blame for their actions. Shifting the blame away from Nazis for the things Nazis do, it's a very bad thing to do at the best of times, but it's gotten even more egregious as of recent times because of, well, you know.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Can I have a drink? I was told video essayists were allowed to drink. I really got thinking about this thing, and then I saw some comments which really reminded me of two studies I came across when I was doing psychology. Milgram and Bocchiaro. So, if you took issue with anything in this story, it's because you're uneducated. Wait, that's not what I said. This is Series 9 of Doctor Who. Why haven't you been doing your reading, son? Ben! It goes without saying that any piece of television that requires studying to make it better or to deal with some kind of problem you had with it obviously fails right out the gate. I could just be well reading into this so I can humble brag about my psychology A-levels. I was fine. But luckily, there seem to be plenty of people who like this episode who haven't studied psychology, I assume. This is just me applying what I happen to know to a bit of TV that I enjoy. This is still Doctor Who, this is still fun. You're having fun, right? Okay. So I was always told Milgram is one of those studies that's a little bit notorious, to the point where most people have kind of heard of it. I'll do a brief summary here in order to get anyone else up to speed though. In 1963, following World War II, people were wondering how the hell Germany could have gotten to the place it did. Some inaccurately surmised that there had to be something wrong with the German people in particular. Milgram is credited with the study putting that whole thing to bed, but it didn't do it in the nicest way possible. A study was conducted where the participants had to administer questions to someone strapped to an electrical machine and give them an electric shock every time they got a question wrong, with the voltage going up every single time. Or while they did this, a stern-looking authority figure would give them standardized prods every time they tried to back out. Now, this was all fake, the machine wasn't real, guy in the chair was pretending, but the participants didn't know that. All of them got to 300 volts. Eventually, the man in the chair asked them to stop, and 65%, 2/3 of the participants, continued to the highest level possible of 450 volts. And these people weren't enjoying it, by the way. There was crying, there was shaking, I think a couple of people fainted. A more recent study, Bocchiaro, tried to see if they'd find similar results to Milgram, whilst also studying the ability to disobey authority figures and blow the whistle on them. A stern-looking authority figure once again asked students if they'd like to recommend people they knew for a horrible-sounding experiment involving sensory deprivation. They were asked to write down a list of names, provide contact information, write a letter recommending the study and making it sound as fun as possible. They were given time on their own, provided with a mailbox in case they wanted to report on this. Again, most of the participants obeyed, despite them predicting the contrary. So remember, free will is a lie, you're all destined to become Nazis and or die.
Oh, shut up and stop being weird. Okay, the determinism versus free will debate is a bit of a contentious issue, or at least it would be, if that made any difference. I would like to now go completely on the record and say that Nazis are responsible for their own actions. Something you may have noticed about Milgram and Bocchiaro, not everybody obeyed. In Milgram, some people left after 300 volts. In Bocchiaro, some people blew the whistle. All these studies mean is that there is evidence to suggest that generally, people can be made to break moral codes due to the influence of an authority figure. Free will still exists, so anyone who wants to use this as an excuse is wrong.
Now, my application of this to which is familiar is admittedly pretty loose. It's hard to say the casing is really an authority figure as such. An authority figure can't physically control what you say and do. We just want to obey them because we instinctively go into an agentic state. But the casings are an external deterministic factor. Given that we learned about all this stuff because of World War II and the horrific things the Nazis did, I do think it's incredibly relevant that we take what caused it to happen and apply it to the Daleks. I find it really interesting how it affects language, leading you from one thought to another, like a link of chains.
Say, you are different from me.
You are different from me.
Exterminate!
Because that's how fascist societies work, isn't it? Though, for this metaphor, I do think the Dalek casing does have too much control over Clara. At one point she asks a question and somehow that gets turned into exterminate. But then again, she seems to have a fair amount of control over the thing. She's emotional in this scene with the Doctor and the gun doesn't go off. Her emotions don't get turned into firepower then. So if a Dalek shoots someone, I still feel comfortable saying that that's what they wanted to do. I also don't worry that much about whether the Doctor killed any Daleks that were trying to surrender, because, well, we see how that plays out in the episode, and they can still say mercy.
Open your casing.
How?
Just think the word open. It'll work.
Yes, it's too restrictive, and it's a bit clunky, and I totally understand why this rubs people up the wrong way.
But I do keep wondering to myself, say if the casing didn't control their speech at all, and they had the ability to just announce to all of the Daleks, I don't want to fight any wars anymore, I want to leave. The other Daleks would just kill them. The Daleks were genetically engineered to have all emotions removed except hate. So that's already a deterministic factor. This kind of stuff has been around since at least Genesis. Speaking of which, there's this scene.
There is much to do. I want the genetically conditioned creatures installed in the machines immediately. 20 of them. 20? They are our troops in this battle for survival.
Yeah, but they're still very erratic, unstable.
They will not be allowed self-control. I will prepare a computer program that will limit their actions.
Now, obviously the implication here is that this doesn't last long, it's a temporary measure, and the Daleks end up shooting the guy holding the remote at the end of the story, so they should have had full control by then. But whilst they were attacking the Thals, they weren't under their own control and were under influence by an outside factor. I think it's interesting that Steven didn't completely pull this idea out of nowhere. Holy shit, I just realised Genesis features an attempt to whistleblow. And the story doesn't let the Daleks off the hook here. I think Steven Moffat's smart enough to think through the implications of this. Nobody made these casings for the Daleks, except maybe Davros, and he couldn't have made them all. So the Daleks, through these casings, radicalised themselves. The comment that made me think about this made the comparison to Fox News, or some of the platforms that radicalise and shape people. People are responsible for their own actions. But responsibility does also lie with the systems that shaped those people. And if we want to prevent these things happening, addressing those systems is what's going to have to happen.
We could still make monsters answer for what they've done, whilst trying to do something about the things that made them monsters. So I'm going to be annoying now and ask, what makes a Dalek story? Is it enough for the Daleks just to be in it? Clearly not. Do the Daleks have to take central role, to have agency and do a lot of things? Do they need to kill a lot of people? Or is it enough for an episode to say interesting things about the Daleks, and the characters themselves can be pretty much Terry Nation brand wallpaper? Well, Davros has always had the tendency to suck all the oxygen out of the room. That's just the character he is. So Daleks, to some extent, can't help but feel like guard dogs. But... okay, I need to get this off my chest.
Doctor.
Flux, this guy. He's so gimmicky. I don't know how the pig slaves got grief, and not him. At least with them, there's the argument of capitalism motif.
Hey, the pigs are an analogy for human beings in the eyes of an uncaring industrialised society. Did that come across?
Okay, alright. Gigahoo also has a good analysis on some of the symbolism with this guy, but is it worth it? Was it worth it for this?
What are you doing now?
Voting. We are a democracy.
In the classic era, they used to reveal the Daleks at the end of the Part 1 cliffhanger, but until then they'd have a placeholder villain, except somehow the placeholder villain now is upstaging the actual villains in their own story, and just why? Don't cut him out entirely, but definitely reduce him. Don't make him the entire villain of Part 1. Replace a lot of what he does with the Daleks and Magician's Apprentice, and I think a fair bit would be improved. If we have the Daleks at the start looking for the Doctor, maybe we could establish how the rest of the universe sees them. Maybe they're seen as a bit of a joke now, and that would flesh out the notion that, like Davros, they're at the end of their rope. Because when I first watched this episode, I didn't quite get the impression that the stuff in the sewers was a new phenomenon. I thought that was just happening all the time and we hadn't seen it. I didn't know that this Dalek Empire was under threat until Davros was proclaiming that he'd just saved them. What if it was the Daleks that were confronting the Doctor and co in this scene? If they had more agency in Part 1, it's fine if they take the backseat in Part 2. What if in this series they experimented with two-parters, we have a Dalek story followed by a Davros story, and we finally get a happy medium between the two that we've never really had before in the show. But now that I've gotten all of my complaints finally out of the way, let's talk about the Doctor.
There's no such thing as the Doctor. I'm just a bloke in a box, telling stories. And I didn't come here because I'm ashamed, but a shame never hurt anyone.
Moffat's conception of what it meant to be the Doctor, to take on that mantle, was to be a children's hero. You can see this in pretty much everything the man has written for Doctor Who.
You never interfere in the affairs of other peoples or planets. Unless there's children crying. Unless there's children crying. Yes.
I mentioned before that I think Child Davros is incredibly relevant to this story, even if he's not a main drive of it, like he was in something like I, Davros. This scenario tests Moffat's Doctor by making his worst enemy a child. Just as Davros is facing the possibility that his philosophy doesn't work, the Doctor is being confronted with the idea that maybe his way does more harm than good. Maybe being the Doctor in this situation, saving a child, would cause far more damage than if he left Davros behind. So he abandons the decision entirely, reacts with shame to it. That's why, even though the farewell confession dial, Doctor facing his death, whole thing is Moffat waving his copy of Alien Bodies in the air for the billionth time, it tracks. The idea of being the Doctor not working means death tracks, especially with what we see of 12 later on. But by the end of this story, the Doctor proves the effectiveness of the way he lives his life. When he defeats Davros, he says this. Yes, he admits he knew what Davros was doing the whole time, but I don't think it undermines the story or means that compassion doesn't win. He still treated Davros with compassion anyway, and Davros, by sticking to the same tricks he always does, defeats himself. There's that revelation about mercy ending up in the Daleks' DNA. Somehow, compassion hasn't just grown in the Doctor like a cancer, it grows in everything he touches. Compassion can't be defeated by something as ineffectual as Davros and the Daleks. This is what I mean when I say this works as a conclusion to Davros. Yeah, he doesn't die here, he doesn't become a better person, but his debate with the Doctor, going back since Genesis, surviving the Time War, has been settled here. Both sides made their cases, and the Doctor has been proved irrefutably correct. Compassion isn't wrong, it beats hatred every time. And with that, Davros has shown that his entire worldview, the philosophy he built the Daleks upon, the rhetoric Nazis like to tell themselves, it doesn't hold up to reality, and it always ends in self-defeat. He's shown his failure so utterly, it's honestly a struggle to think where you'd go with Davros after this. Maybe this is an overly simplistic solution to the dilemma offered by Genesis. Maybe the point of that story is that there is no right or wrong answer. But The Witch is Familiar reframes the question. Genesis of the Daleks asked what you would do in this situation. Moffat asked, what would Doctor Who do in this situation?
They're a good idea. You know, a tank with anger problems. That's an awesome idea, isn't it? And that's brilliant. But also just the idea they're so emotional and screechy and panicky and horrible, and yet they're sort of robots. That's fascinating.
Oh great, a conclusion. This bit's a lot easier to do than an introduction. People have complained that during the Moffat era, the Daleks lost their touch. I can't disagree because I also complained about that. But that's for another video. But to say that Moffat didn't understand or didn't like the Daleks would be inaccurate. It's a complaint us fans like to level all the time when the show does something we don't like. The Daleks are a Nazi parallel. They're not that complicated.
They are still by far Doctor Who's most popular monster, and I think they're the best monsters ever in anything. And yes, they are kind of, you know, a bit of 60s pop art and casters, but you can't improve on them.
I think part of the disconnect comes from the types of stories Steven Moffat likes to tell. They don't always look like what we've come to expect from Dalek stories, especially the ones that become fan favourites. He doesn't write war stories, slaughterfests. He doesn't often write heavy action pieces. The closest we've gotten to this kind of pairing is Rob Shearman penning Dalek, and even then you can see the bits that came from RTD's rewrites. Moffat focused on what a Dalek society would actually look like, what fresh horrors that would entail, the banality of evil. He showed us that not only are the Daleks, like the real-world fascists they embody, evil, they're wrong. Openly and blatantly wrong. The Daleks are hypocrites, who only manage to do anything when they betray the ideology they've built themselves upon. Their ways don't work. They're self-defeating. They're snakes eating their own tails. Alright, it's symbolic, I get it. I don't always succeed, but I at least try to judge stories by what they set out to do and how well they accomplished it. I don't love everything here. There's some complaints as well as some stuff that I like that I didn't get time to address. There are characters, moments and aspects of Terra Firma, Davros and Genesis that I like more, and I might even rewatch a couple of those before I rewatch this. But I still think The Witch is Familiar pretty much meets its goal. It's definitely ambitious. How do you provide a potential conclusion to a decades-long conflict between such iconic characters? How do you pay off all the stories that have come before? Genesis of the Daleks casts such a massive shadow. Almost every Doctor Who story since then gets compared to it. For this to meet it, and get a few other things right along the way, that's not too shabby.
I'll take you a couple of them for tonight. Or hang on.
Good year. So that's The Witch is Familiar. If you watched all the way through, thank you so much. I put a lot of work into this one. Maybe if I'd started that work sooner, I would have gotten it out on time. This is my first time doing anything in this format, so if you have any feedback, any advice, please toss a comment into the vacuum. I'd really appreciate it. And do join me next time for when I talk about another Dalek story. As for which one that'll be, I'll give you a hint. Merry Christmas to all of you at home.